Michelle. That's my name. I'm 72 years old, and I've lived in this small Georgia town my entire life. Worked as a nurse for 40 years before retiring. Raised 2 children on my own after my husband passed when they were young. My son James was always the responsible one, until he married Vanessa. I remember the exact moment when I knew something had to change. We were all gathered for James and Vanessa's housewarming party at their rented duplex. Family, friends, neighbors, about 30 people crammed into that tiny living room with the beige carpet Vanessa always complained about. I'd brought a small gift bag, nothing fancy on the outside. Vanessa took one look at it and laughed, not a kind laugh. "Oh, Michelle brought something too," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. "Probably just a card. She's on a fixed income, you know." She said this last part in a stage whisper, like she was sharing some shameful secret. The room went quiet. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, my fingers tightening around my purse strap. James was across the room talking to his cousin. He hadn't heard. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I did bring a little something." Vanessa's smile never reached her eyes. 5 years of marriage to my son, and I'd never once seen genuine warmth in that smile when it was directed at me. Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. This wasn't the first time Vanessa had made comments about my finances. Ever since James had introduced us at that coffee shop downtown, her with her designer handbag, and him with that hopeful look in his eyes, she'd made it clear she thought I was beneath her. Her parents owned a successful car dealership in Atlanta. Mine had been sharecroppers. "I'm sure whatever it is, it's lovely," said my friend Beatrice, who'd known me since we were girls, jumping rope on these same streets. She shot Vanessa a look that could have curdled milk. I'd been saving for nearly 30 years for this moment. Working double shifts, investing what little I could. Living simply in the same 3-bedroom house where I'd raised my children. The house that was now paid off. The house that sat on 2 acres of land that had suddenly become valuable when they announced the new shopping center would be built nearby. What Vanessa didn't know, what no one knew except my lawyer, was that I'd sold that land to the developers 6 months ago. For a sum that had made even my stoic attorney raise his eyebrows. "James," I called across the room, "could you come here for a minute, honey?" My son excused himself and walked over, that easy smile on his face. He had his father's height, his father's gentle eyes. But he had my determination. At least, he used to. "What's up, Mom?" he asked, putting his arm around Vanessa's waist. She leaned into him, that possessive tilt of her chin I'd come to recognize. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope. Not the gift bag. I'd set that aside on their gift table. This was something else. "I wanted to give you this privately," I said. "But since Vanessa brought up my financial situation in front of everyone, I suppose now is as good a time as any." James frowned. "Mom, whatever Vanessa said, I'm sure she didn't mean—" "Oh, I meant it!" Vanessa interrupted with a little laugh. "But it's not like it's a secret. Everyone knows retired nurses don't exactly live in luxury." The room had gone silent again. All eyes on us. I could feel the tension, thick as Georgia humidity in August. "Open it," I said to James, holding out the envelope. "What would you have done if your daughter-in-law had humiliated you like this in front of everyone you know?" James took the envelope. Confusion written across his face. He glanced at Vanessa, then back at me. Slowly, he broke the seal and pulled out the papers inside. I watched his eyes scan the first page, then widen. His hands began to tremble slightly. Mom, he whispered. This is the deed to a house I finished for him. On Maple Street, the Victorian with the wraparound porch you always admired when you were growing up. It's yours now, paid in full. Vanessa snatched the papers from his hands. Her perfectly manicured nails crinkled the edges as her eyes darted back and forth across the document. How? She demanded. How could you possibly afford this? I smiled. Not a kind smile. I've been saving for a long time, I said simply. For something important. The look on Vanessa's face was worth every double shift, every coupon clipped, every simple dinner eaten alone at my kitchen table. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about my son. About giving him something that was his. Truly his. Not controlled by the woman who'd slowly been isolating him from everyone who loved him. What I didn't tell them, what I couldn't say in that moment with everyone watching, was that there was more to this story than a surprise gift. Much more. And it had begun 3 months earlier, when I'd overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear between Vanessa and a man whose voice I didn't recognize. But tell me, should I have seen this coming? The signs were there all along, if only I'd been willing to see them. I never intended to eavesdrop that day. I'd stopped by their duplex to drop off a casserole. James had mentioned he was working late shifts that week. The spare key was under the ceramic frog, right where it had always been. I let myself in, planning to leave the food and a note. That's when I heard Vanessa's voice from the bedroom. Low, intimate, not the sharp tone she used with me. He doesn't suspect anything, she was saying. His mother, though, she watches me, like she knows. I froze in the hallway, casserole dish growing heavy in my hands. The bedroom door was cracked open just enough for her voice to carry. A man's voice responded, too quiet for me to make out the words. Not James, someone else. The inheritance is the key, Vanessa continued. Once his mother passes, we'll have options. The old woman's sitting on more than they realize. The casserole nearly slipped from my fingers. I caught it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Quiet as a shadow, I set it on the counter and left. They never knew I was there. If you're enjoying this story, take a second to hit that like button. Your support means everything to me, and it helps others find these stories too. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan spun lazy circles above my bed, stirring the humid air but bringing no relief. I kept hearing Vanessa's words. Once his mother passes. Like my death was just an item on her to-do list. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Franklin Pierce. We'd gone to high school together, though he'd gone off to college while I stayed behind to care for my ailing mother. He'd handled my husband's meager estate when he passed. Michelle, he said when I walked into his wood-paneled office. You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. Just the future, maybe. I told him everything. The conversation I'd overheard. My suspicions about Vanessa. My fears for James. Franklin's fingers formed a steeple under his chin. What do you want to do? I want to protect my son, I said. And I want to find out what Vanessa's really after. That's when Franklin told me about the developers interested in my land. The offer they'd made, substantial enough to change everything. I'd been ignoring their letters, attached to my home and the memories it held. But now, those memories seemed less important than my son's future. Sell, I told Franklin. But keep it quiet, and I need your help with something else. Over the next 3 months, I became someone I barely recognized. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Darlene with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I had my will changed, making it appear that James would inherit everything upon my death. I let Vanessa accidentally see the new document when she came over unannounced one afternoon. "Just getting my affairs in order?" I told her with a smile. "At my age, you never know." The gleam in her eyes made my stomach turn. Meanwhile, I used some of the money from the land sale to buy the Victorian on Maple Street. It had been on the market for months, the price dropping steadily. The timing was perfect, or so I thought. What I didn't count on was how deep Vanessa's deception went, or how blind my son had become. 2 weeks before the housewarming party, Darlene called me. Her voice was tight. "You need to come to my office," she said. "There's something you should see." The photographs were spread across her desk when I arrived. Vanessa entering a motel on the edge of town. Vanessa with a man, tall, expensively dressed. Vanessa kissing him in the doorway of room 114. "His name is Richard Calloway," Darlene told me. "He's a real estate developer. Works for the same company that bought your land." My hands trembled as I picked up one of the photos. "They know each other." Darlene nodded. "They've known each other for years, from what I can gather. College sweethearts who reconnected recently. There's more." She slid a document across the desk. A business proposal. Plans for a luxury condominium complex on the exact spot where my house stood. "They need your land," Darlene said. "And they thought they'd get it when you died." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the edge of the desk. "But I already sold it," I whispered. "To a subsidiary company. Richard's bosses, not Richard himself. He doesn't know yet. From what I can tell, he and Vanessa had their own plans for that land. Private plans." I thought of James, his trusting nature. The way he looked at Vanessa like she hung the moon. "I need to tell my son," I said. Darlene's hand covered mine. Her palm was rough, calloused. "You need proof he'll believe. These photos won't be enough. She'll say it was business. And without context, the proposal is just paper." She was right. James would need more than suspicion and circumstantial evidence. He would need to see for himself. "The housewarming party," I said slowly. "That's when I'll give him the house. A place that's his, not hers. And then you wait," Darlene finished. "Set the stage. Let her show her true colors." Do you think I was being too calculating? Too cold? Sometimes I wonder if there was another way. The day of the party arrived. I dressed carefully, a simple blue dress. Pearl earrings my husband had given me on our 10th anniversary. I picked up the gift bag containing a set of vintage keys tied with ribbon and the envelope with the deed. And now, here we were. Vanessa's face flushing with anger and embarrassment as she realized what I'd done. James looking between us, confusion giving way to the first flickers of understanding. But the real shock came when the doorbell rang. James went to answer it, grateful perhaps for the interruption. I heard his voice, surprised. "Richard, what are you doing here?" Vanessa's head snapped up. The color drained from her face. And I knew then that my plan was working better than I could have hoped. "Let me know your opinion. Was I wrong to set this trap? To use my own son as bait to catch the woman who was betraying him?" Richard Calloway stood in the doorway, a bottle of champagne in one hand, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His smile faltered when he saw the crowd. "I thought this was just a small gathering," he said, his eyes finding Vanessa across the room. "You said—" "Richard!" Vanessa cut him off, her voice unnaturally high. What a surprise. James, honey, this is Richard from the development company. Remember I mentioned him? He's handling the new shopping center project. James nodded, extending his hand. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. I watched them carefully, the way Richard's eyes lingered on Vanessa a beat too long, the slight tremble in her hands as she took the champagne from him. The confusion on my son's face as he sensed the undercurrent but couldn't quite name it. I moved closer, the deed still on the coffee table where Vanessa had dropped it. Mr. Calloway, I said, extending my hand. I'm Michelle, James's mother. His handshake was firm, impersonal. Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. We were just celebrating, I continued. I've given James and Vanessa a house. The Victorian on Maple Street. Richard's expression shifted, surprise, then something calculating. The Victorian? That's quite a gift. Mom sold some land to make it happen, James said proudly, his arm around my shoulders. To that company you work for, actually. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. Which parcel? The old family property, I said. 2 acres on Willow Lane. The champagne bottle nearly slipped from his grasp. Vanessa made a small, choked sound. If you're still with me, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Has someone ever betrayed your trust like this? And don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear how this all ends. That's impossible, Richard said, his voice tight. That land wasn't for sale. Apparently it was, I replied. The deal closed last month. Your company seemed quite eager to acquire it. Vanessa stepped forward, her smile brittle. Let's not bore everyone with real estate talk. Richard, can I get you a drink? Something stronger than champagne, perhaps? She practically dragged him toward the kitchen, her nails digging into his arm. I caught Darlene's eye across the room. She'd come as my +1, a friend from church, as far as anyone else knew. She gave me a slight nod and followed them. James looked at me, confusion clouding his features. What was that about? Why would he care about your land? I patted his hand. I'm not sure, honey, but I think Vanessa might have some ideas. The party continued around us, but there was a new tension in the air. Guests sensed it, conversations growing quieter, glances exchanged. James kept looking toward the kitchen, where Vanessa and Richard had been for nearly 15 minutes. I should check on them, he said finally. I nodded, my heart aching for what I knew he might discover. Yes, you should. As he walked away, Beatrice slid into the seat beside me. What's happening, Michelle? You've got that look. Justice, I said quietly. Or maybe just truth. The sound came suddenly, a glass shattering in the kitchen, followed by James's voice, louder than I'd heard it in years. How long? How long? The party went silent. All eyes turned toward the kitchen doorway, where James now stood, his face ashen. Behind him, Vanessa was frantically wiping at a dark stain on her cream-colored blouse. Richard remained by the sink, his posture stiff, defensive. James, please, Vanessa said, reaching for him. It's not what you think. I heard you, James's voice cracked. Both of you, talking about my mother's land, about how you've been waiting for her to die so you could... He broke off, running a hand through his hair. God, Vanessa, were you ever going to tell me about the baby? The room seemed to collectively gasp. I felt my heart stutter in my chest. Baby? Vanessa's hand went protectively to her stomach, a gesture so instinctive it couldn't be faked. James, please, not here. Is it mine? He demanded. Or his? Richard stepped forward. This isn't the place! Answer me! James roared. I'd never seen my gentle son like this, raw, wounded. A lifetime of trust shattered in an instant. I wanted to go to him, but this was his moment, his reckoning. Vanessa's eyes darted around the room, taking in the shocked faces of their friends and family. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. I don't know, she whispered. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the tick of the wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator. James stood perfectly still, as if moving might break him completely. Then he turned and walked out the front door. I rose to follow him, but Beatrice caught my arm. Give him a minute, she murmured. Let him breathe. Vanessa sank into a kitchen chair, tears streaming down her face. Not from remorse, I suspected, but from being caught. Richard straightened his tie, clearly calculating his next move. I think, I said, my voice carrying in the silence, that the party is over. People began gathering their things, murmuring awkward goodbyes. Within minutes, only a few remained. Beatrice, Darlene, myself, and a couple of James's closest friends who refused to leave until they knew he was okay. And of course, Vanessa and Richard, still in the kitchen, now arguing in harsh whispers. I stepped outside onto the small porch. The summer evening was thick with humidity, fireflies beginning to blink in the gathering dusk. James sat on the steps, head in his hands. I lowered myself beside him, my knees protesting the movement. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Did you know? He finally asked, his voice hollow. I hesitated. I knew something wasn't right. I overheard her talking to someone, him, I guess, a few months ago, about waiting for me to die so they could get my land. James made a sound like he'd been punched. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? I asked gently. Or would you have thought I was just being a difficult mother-in-law? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. The house, he said after a while. The Victorian. You bought it for me to have somewhere to go, didn't you? You knew this was coming. I took his hand, his fingers cold despite the warm evening. I bought it because I love you, and because everyone deserves a home that's truly theirs. Behind us, the front door opened. Vanessa stood there, her makeup smeared, eyes red. James, she began, we need to talk. Alone. He didn't turn around. I think you've said enough. The baby, I'll want a paternity test. He cut her off. Until then, I don't want to hear about it. She took a step toward us, then stopped when she saw my expression. Whatever she read in my face made her retreat back inside. What do I do now, Mom? James asked, sounding younger than his 34 years. I squeezed his hand. You go to your new house. You take some time, and you remember who you are. My son, a good man, stronger than you know. He nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. Removing his house key, he placed it on the step. I can't stay here tonight, he said. Not with her. As we stood to leave, the door opened again. This time, it was Richard, his composure regained, his face a mask of professional detachment. Mrs. Johnson? He said, addressing me. A word. James tensed beside me. Whatever you have to say to my mother, you can say to me. Richard's jaw tightened. Fine, the land sale. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. We had an arrangement. An arrangement? I repeated. With whom? His eyes flicked toward the house where Vanessa presumably waited. There were plans for that property. Specific plans that would have benefited everyone. Everyone except my mother, James said coldly. Richard straightened his shoulders. Business is business. Nothing personal. James took a step toward him, and for a moment, I thought he might hit the man. Instead, he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You were sleeping with my wife while plotting to steal my mother's land, and you say it's nothing personal?" He shook his head. "Get out of my sight before I forget how my mother raised me." Richard hesitated, then nodded curtly and walked to his car without looking back. As we watched him drive away, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. The truth was out, but at what cost to my son's heart? What do you think? If you discovered someone you loved had betrayed you so completely, could you ever trust again? The Victorian on Maple Street stood silent in the moonlight, its gabled roof and ornate trim casting delicate shadows across the wraparound porch. I'd had the utilities turned on, but the rooms were empty, a blank canvas waiting for my son to fill. James stood in the center of what would be the living room, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I watched him from the doorway, giving him space to process everything that had happened. "I remember this house from when I was a kid," he said finally. "Old Mrs. Whitaker lived here. She used to give out full-sized candy bars at Halloween." "She did," I agreed, stepping into the room. "And lemonade in the summer. Real lemonade. Not from a mix." He ran his hand along the mantelpiece, fingers tracing the intricate woodwork. "How long have you been planning this?" "The house? About 3 months." I moved to stand beside him. "Ever since I overheard Vanessa that day." James nodded slowly. "And the land sale? Was that part of your plan too?" "The developers had been after that land for years," I said. "I just never had a reason to sell before. But when I realized what Vanessa and Richard were planning..." I shrugged. Sometimes the best revenge is simply doing what your enemies don't expect. If you're still with me on this journey, I'd appreciate you hitting that subscribe button. Your support means the world, and it helps me continue sharing these stories with you all. We spent that night in the empty house, sleeping on air mattresses I'd stashed in the trunk of my car. Just in case. James barely spoke, staring at the ceiling as the moonlight filtered through the curtainless windows. The next morning, his phone rang incessantly. "Vanessa." He silenced it after the 5th call. "You'll have to talk to her eventually," I said gently, handing him a cup of coffee from the shop down the street. "I know." He took the cup, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "But not today." We spent the day making lists, furniture he would need, repairs the house required, calls to make about utilities and mail forwarding. Normal, practical things that gave him something to focus on besides the collapse of his marriage. It was mid-afternoon when the knock came at the door. James tensed, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "If that's Vanessa..." "I'll handle it," I said, rising from my seat on the floor. But it wasn't Vanessa at the door. It was Darlene, her expression grim. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She nodded to James. "Both of you." She placed a manila folder on the kitchen counter, the only surface in the house besides the floor. "Richard Calloway made some calls this morning," she said, "to his bosses at the development company, about the land sale." I felt a chill despite the summer heat. "What kind of calls?" Darlene opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails, legal documents, a timeline scrawled in her precise handwriting. "He's claiming the sale was fraudulent, that you knew about their plans for the condominium complex and deliberately sold to their parent company to sabotage the project." James stepped forward. "That's ridiculous. My mother didn't even want to sell that land." "It gets worse," Darlene continued. Vanessa filed for a temporary restraining order this morning, against both of you. The room seemed to tilt. A restraining order? I echoed. On what grounds? She's claiming harassment, that you orchestrated a public humiliation at the party to damage her reputation, that you've been trying to break up their marriage for years. James slammed his cup down, coffee sloshing over the rim. That's a lie. She's the one who… I know. Darlene cut him off. But she's spinning quite a story. And she has Richard backing her up. I sank onto one of the air mattresses, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Can they do this? Legally? The restraining order is temporary. We can fight it. Darlene sat beside me. But the land sale? That's more complicated. If they can prove you had inside knowledge of their plans? I didn't, I insisted. Not until after I'd already agreed to sell. Darlene nodded. That's what I figured, but they're claiming otherwise, and they have documentation, emails, meeting notes, suggesting Vanessa discussed the project with you months ago. She never… I stopped, a memory surfacing. Wait. She did mention something about Richard's company having big plans for the area, but it was casual conversation. She never specified my land. They're saying she did, and that you deliberately sabotaged their project by selling to the parent company instead of directly to Richard's division. James paced the empty room, his footsteps sharp on the hardwood. This is insane. They're the ones who are conspiring behind our backs. I believe you, Darlene said, but we need proof, and right now, it's your word against theirs. I thought of the photographs, Vanessa and Richard at the motel. What about the evidence you gathered? The affair? Infidelity isn't illegal, Darlene reminded me. Unethical business practices are, and they're claiming you're the one who acted unethically. The irony might have made me laugh if the situation weren't so serious. What do we do? James asked, his voice tight with anger. Darlene closed the folder. We fight back, but we need to be smart about it. They're expecting you to react emotionally, to make mistakes. The baby, I said suddenly. Vanessa is pregnant. If the child is Richard's, that's a big if, Darlene cautioned. And even if it is, proving paternity takes time. We need something more immediate. James had gone very still. The house, he said quietly. This house. How did you pay for it, Mom? I blinked, confused by the change in subject. With the money from the land sale? Why? Because if they're claiming the land sale was fraudulent, they might try to claim this house was purchased with ill-gotten gains. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They could take everything. The money, the house, my reputation. All because I'd tried to protect my son. I should have just told you, I whispered to James. As soon as I overheard Vanessa that day, I should have come straight to you with the truth. He knelt beside me, taking my hands in his. I wouldn't have believed you. You know that? He shook his head. I was blind when it came to her. Darlene cleared her throat. There might be a way to turn this around, but it's risky. We both looked at her. Richard doesn't know exactly what you overheard that day at the duplex, she said to me. And Vanessa doesn't know exactly what evidence we have of their affair. They're bluffing, hoping to intimidate you into backing down. So we call their bluff, James said. Darlene nodded. But we need leverage. Something they want more than they want to punish you. I thought of the Victorian house around us, of the land I'd sold, of the condominium plans in Darlene's folder. And suddenly, I understood. The house. I said slowly. This house, it's on Maple Street. Darlene raised an eyebrow. Yes. Maple Street runs parallel to the new shopping center development. If they're planning luxury condominiums, James caught on immediately. This location would be perfect. Historic home, walking distance to upscale shopping. Exactly, I said. They don't want my old land. They want this house. Darlene's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. You think the whole thing, Vanessa marrying James, the affair with Richard, waiting for you to die to inherit your property, it was all about real estate? Not entirely, I said. But I think it became about that. Vanessa saw an opportunity when she met Richard. And Richard saw an opportunity when he realized who Vanessa was married to. James's face had gone pale. So our entire marriage was just, what, a long con? I squeezed his hand. I don't know, honey. Maybe it started real. Maybe she did love you, in her way. He pulled away, standing abruptly. I need some air. We watched him walk out onto the porch, his shoulders hunched against a weight no mother could lift. He'll be okay, Darlene said quietly. Eventually. I know. I turned back to her. So, what's our next move? She tapped the folder thoughtfully. We set a trap, using this house as bait. And how do we do that? Darlene smiled, a sharp, predatory expression I'd never seen on her face before. We invite them both here, to negotiate, and we record everything. As she outlined her plan, I felt a mixture of dread and determination. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about truth, about making sure my son could rebuild his life on solid ground, not the quicksand of Vanessa's lies. But as I watched James through the window, standing alone on the porch of the house I'd bought to give him a fresh start, I wondered, at what point does the pursuit of justice become its own form of destruction? Do you think there are some truths better left uncovered? Some betrayals too painful to fully expose? The Victorian on Maple Street was transformed. No longer empty, it now contained just enough furniture to look like a home in progress. A couch and coffee table in the living room, a small dining set, lamps casting warm pools of light against the gathering dusk. James had insisted on staying at a friend's house. I can't be there, he'd said. I might kill him. I understood. This wasn't his battle to fight. It was mine. Darlene had set up the recording equipment, small, discreet devices placed strategically throughout the first floor. All legal in Georgia, she assured me, as long as one party to the conversation knew about the recording. That party was me. Remember, Darlene said, checking the equipment one last time before leaving through the back door. Let them talk. Let them incriminate themselves. Don't push too hard. I nodded, smoothing down my dress, the same blue one I'd worn to the housewarming party, a deliberate choice. At precisely 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Vanessa stood on the porch, her face carefully composed, wearing a loose-fitting blouse that concealed any hint of her pregnancy. Behind her, Richard waited at the bottom of the steps, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Michelle? Vanessa said, her voice cool. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Come in, I replied, stepping aside. Both of you? If you've made it this far with me, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything, and it helps me continue sharing these stories that need to be told. They entered cautiously, like predators sensing a trap, but too hungry to resist the bait. I led them to the living room, gesturing toward the couch. I took the armchair opposite, my back straight, hands folded in my lap. Nice place, Richard said, glancing around. Historic homes like this are rare finds these days. Yes, I agreed, especially in this location. So convenient to the new development. A flicker of something, surprise, wariness, crossed his face. That's true. Let's not waste time, Vanessa cut in. We're here to discuss the situation with the land sale and other matters. Of course. I smiled thinly. You've made some serious accusations. Fraud, harassment. I believe you even filed for a restraining order? Vanessa had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was a precautionary measure. After the scene at the party, the scene where your affair was exposed? I asked mildly. Or the scene where you announced to everyone that I couldn't afford a proper gift for my own son? Richard cleared his throat. Mrs. Johnson, we're not here to rehash personal grievances. This is about business. Is it? I leaned forward slightly. Then let's talk business. You claim I fraudulently sold my land to sabotage your condominium project. Yet I never knew about any such project until after the sale was complete. That's not true, Vanessa said quickly. I told you about it months ago. We discussed it over coffee at your house. I shook my head. We never had such a conversation. It's your word against mine, she replied, a hint of smugness in her tone. Actually, I said, it's your word against reality. The development company approached me about selling that land 3 years ago. I have all their letters. They made regular offers, which I regularly declined. Until 3 months ago. Richard shifted uncomfortably. The timing is suspicious. Is it? Or is it suspicious that you and my daughter-in-law were having an affair while plotting to acquire my property after my death? I kept my voice even, remembering Darlene's advice. Let them talk. That's absurd, Vanessa scoffed, but her eyes darted to Richard. Is it? I reached into the side table drawer and removed a manila envelope, not Darlene's photos, but they didn't know that. I have evidence suggesting otherwise. Richard's jaw tightened. What kind of evidence? I didn't answer directly. Instead, I said, I know about the motel on Route 16. Room 114? I know about the meetings with investors where you discussed acquiring the Johnson property once the old lady was out of the picture. I know about the offshore account you set up in both your names. This last part was a bluff. Darlene had found no such account. But the way Vanessa's face drained of color told me I'd hit closer to the truth than I'd expected. You've been spying on us, she whispered. I've been protecting my family, I corrected. Something you might understand, given your condition. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach. Leave my baby out of this. Gladly. But I wonder, does Richard know when the baby is due? Have you told him it might not be his? Richard's head snapped toward Vanessa. What is she talking about? Vanessa's composure cracked. She's lying, trying to turn us against each other. The baby is due in January, I said calmly. But Vanessa and James were in Savannah for their anniversary in April. The weekend of the 15th. When did you last see her that month, Richard? The calculation played out on his face, counting back, realizing the implications. Vanessa? His voice had a dangerous edge. She's manipulating you, Vanessa insisted, but her voice trembled. This is exactly what she wants. What I want, I said, is very simple. I want you both to drop all claims against me regarding the land sale. I want the restraining order withdrawn, and I want you to leave my son alone. Richard stood abruptly, pacing to the window. And in return? In return, the contents of this envelope stay private. And I paused, letting the moment stretch. I might be persuaded to sell this house. He turned, interest sharpening his features. Sell? To the right buyer, for the right price. I gestured around us. As you said, it's a rare find. Perfect for, say, a model unit in an upscale development. Or a sales office with historic charm. Richard and Vanessa exchanged a look, partners in crime reassessing their strategy. The house isn't even in your name? Vanessa said. You gave it to James. The deed hasn't been recorded yet. I lied smoothly. A simple oversight in all the excitement. Richard returned to the couch, sitting forward, elbows on his knees. What price are we talking about? Triple what I paid for it. He laughed, but it wasn't a dismissal. It was recognition. One player acknowledging another's skill. That's steep. So are legal fees, and the cost to your reputation when those photos become public. Vanessa stood now, agitated. This is blackmail. This is negotiation, I corrected. Something you both understand well. Richard studied me, reassessing. You're not what I expected. No, I agreed. I'm not the helpless old woman waiting to die so you could swoop in and take what's mine. What a disappointment that must be. The silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken calculations. Finally, Richard nodded. I'll need to make some calls. Discuss this with my partners. Of course. I rose, signaling the end of our meeting. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, I can't guarantee the contents of this envelope will remain private. They left without further argument, Richard's hand at the small of Vanessa's back, guiding her through the door. I watched from the window as they spoke intensely beside his car, Vanessa's gestures becoming increasingly frantic as Richard remained stone-faced. When they drove away, Darlene emerged from the back of the house. We got it all, she said, holding up one of the recording devices. Every word. I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Will it be enough? More than enough. The implied admission about the offshore account alone. She shook her head admiringly. That was inspired, a complete shot in the dark that hit the target. So what happens now? Now we wait, see if they take the bait. They did. The next morning, Richard called with an offer for the house. Not triple what I'd paid, but close enough. I countered once, he accepted, and by afternoon, we had a signed purchase agreement, contingent on the withdrawal of all claims against me and a legally binding non-disclosure agreement for all parties. What Richard and Vanessa didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the deed to the Victorian had indeed been recorded in James's name the day after the housewarming party. The house was his, not mine to sell. When Richard discovered this, 48 hours after our meeting, it was too late. The restraining order had been withdrawn. The fraud allegations dropped, and the recordings of our conversation were safely in the hands of not only Darlene, but also Franklin Pierce, my lawyer, and the district attorney, an old classmate of Franklin's who took a dim view of real estate fraud and conspiracy. The investigation that followed was swift and devastating. The offshore account was real, as it turned out, and contained funds that should have gone to Richard's investors. Vanessa's involvement was deemed peripheral. She hadn't handled the money directly, but her knowledge of the scheme was enough to make her toxic in our small community. As for the baby, a paternity test eventually confirmed what I think James had known in his heart all along. The child was his, a daughter, born the following January. He named her Grace, a choice I found both ironic and perfect. Vanessa left town before the birth, unable to face the consequences of her actions. She signed away her parental rights in exchange for James dropping any potential civil claims against her. Last I heard, She was living in Florida, working in real estate. Richard wasn't so lucky. The charges against him resulted in a 5-year sentence, reduced to 3 for cooperation with authorities investigating similar schemes across the state. And James? He moved into the Victorian on Maple Street, slowly furnished it room by room, planted a garden in the backyard where his daughter could play when she was old enough. He healed, gradually, the way broken things do, with visible seams, but stronger at the mended places. As for me, I bought a small cottage 2 streets over. Close enough to help with my granddaughter, far enough to give James the independence he needed. The remaining money from the land sale went into a trust for Grace's education. Sometimes, on summer evenings, we sit on that wraparound porch, James and I, watching Grace toddle across the lawn, chasing fireflies. And I think about choices, about protection, about the lengths we go to for those we love. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked me once. "Getting involved the way you did?" I watched my granddaughter's delighted face as she cupped a firefly in her small hands, the soft glow illuminating her fingers from within. "No," I said. "Some truths need to be brought to light, no matter how painful. Some betrayals can't be allowed to stand." He nodded, understanding in a way he couldn't have before experiencing both the betrayal and its aftermath. "Thank you," he said simply. "For the house, for everything." I took his hand, this son of mine who had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. That's what mothers do. We protect what's ours. What lesson do you see here? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Because sometimes the most important gift we can give isn't a house or money, or even justice. It's the truth, however difficult it may be to face.